Xylora Prime was a world that sparkled with an eerie, unnatural beauty. From orbit, it looked like a paradise-a planet of shimmering blue oceans and lush emerald forests, with towering mountain ranges that glittered like diamonds under the twin suns. But beneath its surface lay a dark truth that only those unfortunate enough to know it could understand. Beneath the crystalline forests and sparkling seas were the slave camps. Buried deep underground, in a labyrinth of tunnels and caverns, the Carrick Dominion had constructed massive prison complexes. The Carrick were feared across the galaxy, a race of brutal warlords who conquered worlds and enslaved entire species. Xylora Prime was one of their prized worlds, not for its beauty, but for its strategic value and the abundance of precious resources buried within its core. But even more valuable than the planet's resources were the Isverii. The Isverii were an all-female race, known across the stars for their ethereal beauty and their potent psychic abilities. Tall and slender, with skin that glowed faintly in the dark, they moved with grace, their eyes shimmering with a light that betrayed their inner power. But here on Xylora Prime, the Carrick had found a way to suppress that power. Each Isverii was fitted with a neural inhibitor device that cut them off from their psychic abilities, rendering them powerless. They were forced to work in the mines, digging for the precious energy crystals that fueled the Carrick war machine. Narai was one of them, a leader among the Isverii before her capture. She had once led a rebellion on her home planet, but the Carrick had crushed it, killing thousands and taking her people as slaves. Now, she was a shadow of her former self, her powers dampened, her spirit broken. She could still feel the faint hum of her psychic abilities deep inside her, but the inhibitor blocked her from accessing them fully. It was a constant reminder of her helplessness. Every day was the same. The guards would come, barking orders in their guttural language. The slaves, beaten into submission, would march to the mines, working long hours with little food or rest. The punishment for disobedience was swift and brutal. The Carrick guards were relentless, and any sign of rebellion was met with violence. Yet, in the darkest corners of the slave camps, whispers began to circulate. Whispers of someone moving in the shadows. A rumor spread among the slaves, carried on the lips of those brave enough to believe and hope. They spoke of a human. The humans, or Terrans, as the wider galaxy called them, were not well known in this part of space. The Earth Coalition, humanity's fledgling interstellar government, had only recently made contact with the outer systems. Most saw humans as insignificant newcomers in the grand scheme of galactic politics. Fragile creatures, lacking the advanced technology or natural abilities of other species. But this human was different. He was said to be a soldier, a lone warrior who had somehow evaded capture. He had been spotted in the shadows, moving through the tunnels and disappearing before the Carrick could find him. Some said he had been here for months, gathering information, planning something. The Isverii, who had long since lost faith in the possibility of rescue, dismissed the rumors at first. A human? One man, alone, in a place like this? The idea seemed laughable. But the whispers persisted, growing louder with each passing week. Some even claimed they had seen in brief flashes of a figure in stolen armor, slipping through the darkness. Narai, like most, didn't believe it at first. But as the days wore on, strange things began to happen. Guards would disappear, their bodies found later with no explanation. Supplies would vanish from the Carrick armories, only to reappear in the hands of the slaves. And then there were the dreams. For weeks, Narai had been experiencing vivid dreams, fragments of thoughts and emotions that weren't her own. She saw flashes of battle, heard the roar of gunfire, and felt a fierce determination that wasn't hers. In these dreams, she caught glimpses of a face human, battle-scarred, with eyes hardened by years of war. She could feel his resolve, his refusal to give up, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The dreams disturbed her at first. But over time, they became more frequent, more intense. And then one night, she felt something different, an unmistakable presence reaching out to her mind, as though someone was calling to her across a vast distance. He's here. The thought came unbidden, a certainty that filled her with both hope and dread. Could it be true? Could this human, this lone soldier, really be the one behind the attacks on the guards? Was he truly here to help them? Narai kept these thoughts to herself, unsure of what to believe. But as the weeks passed, the signs became harder to ignore. The guards were growing more paranoid, more violent. They began to search the tunnels more frequently, setting traps and scanning for intruders. Whatever was happening, it was clear that the Carrick were on edge. One evening, as the slaves were being herded back to their quarters, a sudden explosion rocked the compound. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging the tunnels into darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then, chaos erupted. The guards shouted in a guttural tongue, scrambling to restore order. The slaves, confused and terrified, huddled together, unsure of what was happening. But Narai knew. She could feel it in the air, the subtle shift in energy, the crackle of something powerful awakening inside her. The inhibitors were failing. Narai stood, her heart pounding in her chest. Her hands trembled as she reached out with her mind, testing the limits of her abilities. And then she felt it, a spark, small but unmistakable. Her powers were returning. The explosion wasn't an accident. Someone had sabotaged the system. He's here. The realization hit her like a wave, and for the first time in years, Narai felt a glimmer of hope. She turned to her companions, Ciliara and Ixari, who stood frozen in shock, their eyes wide as they too began to sense the return of their powers. "This is it," Narai whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "He's here. The human. He's freeing us." Ciliara looked at her in disbelief. A human? How could one human do this? Narai didn't have an answer. But she knew, deep down, that it was true. Somehow, against all odds, this lone human soldier had found a way to breach the Carrick defenses. And now, he was giving them one chance to fight back. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Narai's heart raced. The guards were coming. But this time, they wouldn't be helpless. She reached out with her mind, her powers growing stronger with each passing second. The inhibitor was weakening, and for the first time in years, she felt the full force of her psychic abilities returning. She could feel the guards approaching, sense their fear and confusion. And she knew that this time, they would not be able to stop her. "This is our moment," Narai said, her voice filled with newfound determination. "We fight. We fight for our freedom." Ciliara and Ixari nodded, their eyes blazing with the same fire that burned in Narai's heart. The human soldier, whoever he was, had done his part. Now it was their turn. As the guards rounded the corner, Narai raised her hand, her mind reaching out to seize control of the situation. The power surged through her, and with a single thought, she sent the guards crashing into the walls, their weapons clattering to the ground. The time for waiting was over. The rebellion had begun. The air in the compound was thick with tension as the slaves, still disoriented from the explosion, scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. The dim emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows on the walls of the cavernous slave quarters. It felt as though the entire complex was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Narai could feel the surge of energy within her, the neural inhibitor's grip weakening with every passing second. She exchanged a glance with Ciliara and Ixari, the only other Isverii who had remained close to her through these dark times. Ciliara was the youngest among them, her golden skin glowing faintly in the dim light, her wide, violet eyes full of uncertainty. Ixari, older and more battle-hardened, had a sharpness to her features, a constant reminder of the war they had lost years ago. Their psychic abilities, long dormant, were beginning to stir. "I don't know if this is real," Ciliara whispered, clutching the edge of her tattered tunic. Her voice trembled, but there was a flicker of hope behind the fear. "I can feel my power returning, but what if it doesn't last? What if it's just another trap?" "It's no trap," Narai replied, her tone firm. Not this time. He's here. The human. For a long time, the idea of a human one fragile soldier had seemed preposterous. They had heard the rumors, but the HFY had learned to distrust rumors. Too many false hopes had led them into despair. Yet now, in this moment, with the Carrick guards distracted and the inhibitors weakening, it was undeniable, something had changed. Ciliara frowned. A human? What can he possibly do? He's just one man. Narai couldn't answer that. She didn't know how this lone human had managed to disrupt the Carrick's brutal system, nor how he had survived for so long without capture. But she had seen him in her dreams, her visions. She had felt his presence like a distant star on the edge of her consciousness. A human, yes, but something more. He's strong, Ciliara, Narai said, turning to face her friend. I don't understand it either, but he's been watching, planning, waiting for this moment. And now it's here. We need to act before it's too late. Ixari, who had remained silent until now, crossed her arms and leaned against the cold stone wall. Her sharp, silver eyes flicked between Narai and Ciliara. Even if this human is real, we don't know what we're dealing with. The Carrick will recover from this soon enough, and when they do, they'll come down on us harder than ever before. We need to be smart. Narai nodded. Ixari was right. Whatever was happening, they had a narrow window of opportunity. The Carrick were brutal, but they weren't fools. The temporary blackout wouldn't last, and when it was over, they would hunt down whoever was responsible. The slaves were likely to suffer the consequences unless they acted quickly. But still, something tugged at Narai's mind, a feeling she couldn't shake. The human, whoever he was, had been waiting for this moment just as much as they had. He wasn't reckless, he was precise. There had to be a plan, something he was working toward. They just needed to find him. We need to find him, Narai said, her voice steady but urgent. We need to know what he's planning. This isn't just some random act of sabotage. He's freeing us for a reason. Ixari scoffed. And what makes you think we can trust him? He's not one of us. For all we know, this could be part of some larger plot. We're pawns, Narai. Don't forget that. I haven't forgotten, Narai shot back, her eyes narrowing. But I also haven't forgotten what it's like to fight for something. To believe in something. And if there's even a chance that he can help us escape this place, then we need to take it. Ciliara looked between them, biting her lip nervously. So, what do? We wait, Narai said. But not for long. I can feel him. He's close. The explosion had done more than just disrupt the inhibitors. It had thrown the Carrick into disarray. Narai could hear their guttural shouts echoing down the corridors as they scrambled to restore power. The guards were spread thin, trying to maintain order and locate the source of the sabotage. It was the perfect distraction, one that the slaves, if they were brave enough, could use to their advantage. Suddenly, a low hum vibrated through the floor beneath their feet. The emergency lights flickered again, and this time they stayed on, casting a sickly orange glow over the cavernous space. The blackout was ending. We don't have much time, Narai said, her mind racing. She could feel the inhibitors starting to regain control, but it wasn't strong enough yet to fully suppress her abilities. Not completely. We need to move now, before the Carrick regroup. As if on cue, the door to their cell block slid open with a sharp hiss. Narai, Ciliara, and Ixari tensed, expecting to see a squad of Carrick guards storming in. Instead, a lone figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint light of the corridor beyond. He was human. Narai's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the figure from her visions. His face was partially hidden beneath the hood of a stolen Carrick cloak, but there was no mistaking the determination in his eyes. He carried a stolen Carrick energy rifle, slung casually over one shoulder, and his stance was that of a trained soldier, alert, focused, ready for anything. Ethan Voss. The man who had haunted her dreams for weeks. He stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the three HFY. For a brief moment, he locked eyes with Narai, and she felt a strange connection between them, like a tether linking their minds across the gulf of species and experience. He didn't speak right away, but there was no need. In that one glance, Narai knew he was here to help. "You're the human," Ciliara whispered, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. "The one they've been talking about." Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "I don't have much time to explain," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The Carrick will restore full power soon, and when they do, they'll come down on this place hard. We need to move." "Move where?" Ixari asked, suspicion still lacing her voice. "You're one man. What do you expect us to do?" Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "I've been sabotaging their systems for weeks. I've mapped out the entire complex. There's a way out, a hidden passage near the eastern tunnels. But we have to act fast, before they find us." "And you expect us to just trust you?" Ixari pressed, folding her arms. "You don't have to trust me," Ethan said evenly. "But you have two choices: stay here and wait for the Carrick to put you back in chains, or come with me and fight for your freedom." Narai took a step forward, her eyes locked on Ethan's. "I've seen you," she said quietly. "In my dreams. I know you've been fighting for us. I don't know why, but I believe you." Ethan gave a small nod of acknowledgement, his eyes softening for just a moment. "I've been fighting for all of you," he said. "No one deserves to live like this. Not you, not anyone." For a brief moment, silence fell over the group. The weight of the decision hung in the air like a heavy mist. The Carrick would soon regain control, and when they did, the chance for escape would be lost. This human, this strange, unexpected savior was offering them a way out, but the risks were high. To trust him was to step into the unknown. Narai looked at her friends. She could see the fear in Ciliara's eyes, the doubt in Ixari's posture. But beneath that, she could also see something else, a glimmer of hope, a spark of rebellion that hadn't yet been extinguished. "We fight," Narai said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "We fight for our freedom." Without another word, she turned and followed Ethan into the corridor, her heart pounding with anticipation. Ciliara and Ixari hesitated for only a moment before following her. The human had given them a glimmer of hope, a chance to reclaim their lives. Now it was up to them to take it. The corridors of the Carrick slave complex echoed with the distant sounds of alarms and shouting guards. Red emergency lights pulsed overhead, casting deep shadows across the rough stone walls as Narai, Ciliara, Ixari, and the human soldier, Ethan Voss, moved swiftly through the narrow passages. The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and tension, and every step felt like it could be their last. The complex was a maze of interlocking tunnels, but Ethan led them with the sure-footedness of someone who had memorized every twist and turn. As they moved, Narai could feel her powers returning in full. The inhibitors had not completely recovered from the sabotage, and her psychic abilities were no longer just a faint glimmer, they were surging back. She could feel the energy coursing through her veins, stronger and more vibrant with every passing moment. But time was running out. The Carrick would not remain in disarray for long, and Narai knew that when they regained control, their vengeance would be swift and merciless. Escape was their only option, but first, they had to face the warlord who ruled this fortress with an iron fist. As they rounded a corner, Ethan slowed his pace, signaling for the group to stop. He crouched low, peering around a bend in the tunnel ahead. Narai, still adjusting to her reawakened powers, caught a flash of his thoughts, focused, disciplined, and laced with the weight of responsibility. He was calculating their next move. Ahead was the central chamber, the heart of the slave complex. And inside was Vashtor, the Carrick warlord who had overseen the enslavement of the HFY and countless others. A hulking, armored brute, Vashtor was known for his cruelty and tactical brilliance. He was feared even among his own kind, and the thought of confronting him sent a chill down Narai's spine. Ethan turned to the group, his expression grim. This is it. Vastor will be in there with his elite guard. We'll have to take them down if we want any chance of escape. I've sabotaged the power grid, but they'll restore it soon, and once they do, they'll re-establish control of the inhibitors. We need to strike hard and fast. Ciliara's eyes widened, her usually calm demeanor cracking. We're going to fight him? Vastor? How? He's a monster. Even if we have our powers back, we can't dash. We don't have a choice, Narai cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. If we don't stop him here, we'll never get out of this place. He'll hunt us down and drag us back in chains. Ixari, ever the pragmatic warrior, nodded in agreement. She's right. This is our only shot. We have to take it. Ethan's eyes flicked to Narai, his expression unreadable. I've seen what you can do. Your powers. They're stronger than any weapon the Carrick have. You can win this fight. But we have to work together. Narai swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. She had been a leader once, before the Carrick had taken everything from her. Now, in this moment, that mantle had fallen on her again. She wasn't just fighting for herself, or even for her friends. She was fighting for all the Isverii, for every soul trapped in this nightmarish place. Ethan motioned them forward. Stay close. We'll take them by surprise. The group moved silently into the chamber, slipping through the shadows of the tall, jagged pillars that supported the immense stone ceiling. The chamber was vast, lit by a harsh red glow that came from the enormous power core in the center. The core was still sputtering, damaged from Ethan's sabotage, but it wouldn't remain offline for long. And there, standing before the core, was Vastor. The Carrick warlord was even more imposing in person than Narai had imagined. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, his body was encased in thick, gleaming black armor, his skin a deep crimson, marked with scars from countless battles. His helmet was a brutal thing, shaped like a beast's maw, with glowing red eyes that pierced the dim light of the chamber. His gauntlets crackled with energy, and in his right hand he held a massive energy blade that hummed with deadly power. Beside him, his elite guard stood at attention 6 of the fiercest Carrick warriors, each armed with energy rifles and reinforced armor. They were heavily armed and utterly loyal to Vastor, ready to die for their warlord. Narai's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the pulse of Vastor's mind, a mind brimming with violence and dominance. His thoughts were cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy. But beneath that, there was something else. He wasn't expecting an attack. Not from them. Good. Ethan glanced at Narai. Now. Narai reached out with her mind, her psychic energy unfurling like a wave. She concentrated, focusing on Vastor's elite guards first. With a surge of power, she seized control of their thoughts, bending their minds to her will. It wasn't easy. The Carrick were strong-willed, resistant to mental manipulation, but Narai's powers had grown sharper since the inhibitors weakened. She felt them struggle, resist, but one by one, their minds fell to her control. The elite guards turned, raising their rifles not at the intruders, but at Vastor. The warlord's eyes flared with rage as he realized what was happening. Traitors, he roared, his voice shaking the walls of the chamber. With a single, furious swing of his energy blade, he cut down 2 of his own guards in an instant, their bodies crumpling to the floor. But the others hesitated, their loyalty eroded by Narai's psychic grip. Vastor's attention snapped to Narai, his eyes burning with fury. You think your pathetic tricks will stop me, Isverii? I will crush you and your kind, as I always have. With a roar, Vastor charged toward them, his energy blade crackling with lethal force. Ethan moved swiftly, raising his stolen rifle and firing a volley of shots at the warlord. Vastor deflected the blasts with ease, his armor shimmering as the energy bolts bounced off. Narai and her companions scattered, each taking cover behind the pillars. Vashtor was fast, unnaturally fast for someone his size, and his strength was overwhelming. The chamber shook with the force of his attacks, and even the stone walls seemed to tremble beneath his rage. But they were not without their own strength. As Vashtor swung his blade at Ethan, narrowly missing him, Ciliara focused her powers, her eyes glowing with violet light. She reached out with her mind, amplifying Ethan's speed, making his movements more fluid, more precise. He dodged the next strike with ease, rolling across the floor and returning fire with deadly accuracy. This time, his shots found their mark, striking Vashtor's armor and staggering him for a moment. Narai seized the opportunity. She concentrated, sending a psychic blast toward Vashtor, aiming for his mind. The warlord grunted in pain, clutching his helmet as the force of her attack rattled his thoughts. But he was stronger than she had anticipated. He shook off the psychic assault with a snarl, his red eyes locking onto her. "You will die, Esverii," he growled, stalking toward her with murderous intent. But before he could strike, Ixari appeared from the shadows, her powers channeled into a single, devastating blow. With a flick of her wrist, she sent a telekinetic wave crashing into Vashtor, sending him stumbling backward. It wasn't enough to defeat him, but it bought them time. "Keep him off balance," Narai shouted, her voice ringing through the chamber. "We can't overpower him, but we can wear him down." The battle raged on, with Ethan and the Esverii working together in perfect synchronization. Ciliara's psychic enhancements made Ethan faster and more agile than ever before, his shots landing more precisely with each volley. Ixari's telekinetic blasts kept Vashtor on the defensive, forcing him to constantly readjust his footing. And Narai, using her mind to disrupt his thoughts, kept him from focusing his full strength. Vashtor fought like a cornered beast, his fury fueling every strike, but it was clear that he was tiring. His movements became slower, more desperate. The warlord's elite guard had been neutralized, leaving him alone in the fight. In a final, desperate lunge, Vashtor swung his energy blade in a wide arc, aiming to cut Ethan down. But Ethan, with Ciliara's psychic boost, moved faster than the warlord could anticipate. He ducked beneath the swing, pivoted, and fired a single, well-aimed shot directly at Vashtor's helmet. The blast struck true, shattering the warlord's visor and sending him reeling. Blood trickled from beneath his mask as he staggered backward, disoriented. Narai saw her chance. With all her remaining strength, she focused her mind on Vashtor, pushing through the chaos of the battle, past his defenses, and into the core of his thoughts. She unleashed a torrent of psychic energy, overwhelming his mind with images of his own defeat, his empire crumbling, his slaves rising against him. Vashtor let out a final, agonized roar as his mind shattered beneath the weight of Narai's assault. His energy blade flickered and died, and the warlord collapsed to his knees, his strength finally spent. Ethan approached him, rifle raised, but there was no need. Vashtor, the mighty warlord of the Carrick Dominion, was already defeated. As the chamber fell silent, Narai lowered her hand, her breathing heavy. The battle was over. Vashtor was no longer a threat. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and respect. "You did it." "No," Narai replied, her voice quiet but firm. "We did it." Together, they had brought down one of the most feared warlords in the galaxy. The Carrick Dominion's hold on Xylora Prime was broken. But the fight for freedom had only just begun. The sun was just beginning to rise over the jagged peaks of Xylora Prime as Narai, Ethan, Ciliara, and Ixari stood atop the cliffside overlooking the horizon. The battle was over, and the Carrick slave complex had been reduced to little more than smoldering ruins in the valley below. The sprawling network of underground chambers, once teeming with the cries of the enslaved, was silent now. The air was fresh, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the complex like a dark cloud had lifted. For the first time in years, Narai could breathe freely. Vashtor was dead. The mighty Carrick warlord, the scourge of her people, had fallen. His empire was fractured, and though the Carrick dominion would still exist, their power over Xylora Prime had been shattered. Word of his defeat would spread quickly, and soon the other Carrick forces would retreat. But victory was bittersweet. So many had died, and so many still remained imprisoned on other worlds, their fates uncertain. Still, for the Asverii and the other enslaved species on Xylora Prime, this was the dawn of a new chapter, a chance for freedom and rebuilding. Ethan stood beside Narai, silent for a moment as he stared out at the horizon. His expression was calm, but Narai could feel the weight of what had happened pressing down on him. He had been their savior, the catalyst that had sparked the rebellion and set them free. But even now, with the battle won, there was a restlessness about him, a sense that his journey was far from over. Narai turned to him, studying his features in the soft light of dawn. He was an enigma, this human. Fragile, like all humans, but fierce in spirit. She had never expected someone like him to be the one to free them, one man, alone, in a galaxy full of monsters. And yet, he had done the impossible. He had given them hope. "You saved us," Narai said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence. "I don't know how we can ever repay you for what you've done." Ethan shook his head, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "I didn't do this for repayment," he said, his voice low but steady. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." Narai smiled softly. "Even so, you gave us a chance when no one else would. You fought for us when we had nothing left to fight for." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The others, Ciliara and Ixari, had drifted a few paces away, talking quietly as they surveyed the ruins of the slave complex. They too seemed unsure of what came next. They had won their freedom, but the future was still uncertain. Ethan finally turned to Narai, his eyes filled with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I've fought for a lot of people in a lot of places. I've seen too much suffering, too many worlds torn apart by war and tyranny. The Carrick. They weren't the first monsters I've faced, and they won't be the last." Narai's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. "You don't have to keep fighting," she said gently. "You've done more than enough." Ethan smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. "There's always another fight out there. Another world that needs saving. I can't just stop." Narai understood. She had once felt the same, driven by the need to protect her people, to lead them in the face of overwhelming odds. But now, with the weight of leadership lifted, she realized that there was more to life than fighting. There had to be more. "Then stay," she said, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. "Stay here, with us. Help us rebuild. We could use someone like you, Ethan. The galaxy could use more people like you." Ethan looked at her, surprised. For a moment, Narai thought he might say yes, that he might consider staying on Xylora Prime and helping them create something new. But then she saw the conflict in his eyes, the pull of something larger than any one place. "I wish I could," Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "But this isn't my world. And there are others out there who need help. I've seen too much to turn away now." Narai nodded, though a part of her was saddened by his words. She had hoped, in some way, that they could find peace together, that he might stay and be part of the new beginning they were building. But she understood. Some people were meant for the fight, and Ethan was one of them. "I'll make sure you're remembered," Narai said, her voice soft but firm. "For what you did here. For what you gave us." Ethan smiled again, this time with more warmth. "I'm not in it for the recognition, but thank you." A soft breeze blew across the cliffside, carrying with it the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore far below. The rising sun bathed the landscape in golden light, casting long shadows over the remnants of the Carrick stronghold. The world, once a prison, now seemed full of possibility. Behind them, the other survivors' alien races of all kinds were beginning to emerge from the tunnels and hidden alcoves where they had been hiding during the battle. Some looked dazed, unsure of what to do now that their chains had been broken. Others wept with joy, embracing one another in the soft light of morning. They were free. Truly free. Narai watched them, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and hope. It would take time, perhaps years, to rebuild what had been lost. But they had a future now, something they had never thought possible. Ciliara and Ixari approached, their expressions solemn but hopeful. "So what happens now?" Ciliara asked, her wide, violet eyes full of uncertainty. "We're free, but what do we do?" Narai smiled, though the weight of the question hung heavy in the air. "We rebuild," she said simply. "We take back what was taken from us. And we help others who are still trapped, just as we were." Ixari nodded, her sharp features set with determination. "The Carrack will fall, all of them. We'll make sure of it." Ciliara, though still hesitant, nodded as well. "But we'll need leaders, Narai. We'll need you." Narai felt a pang in her chest at the thought. She had spent so long fighting, leading, sacrificing. But now, standing here in the soft light of dawn, she realized that maybe it was time for something new. She had helped lead her people to freedom, and now it was their turn to shape their future. She didn't have to carry the burden alone anymore. "You'll have me," Narai said softly. "But we'll lead together. All of us." Ethan watched the exchange, his eyes thoughtful. He had done what he had come to do. Now, it was time for him to move on. "Looks like you'll be in good hands," he said, offering a small smile. "You don't need me anymore." Narai shook her head. "We'll always need people like you, Ethan. But I understand. Just promise me one thing." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Don't forget us," she said, her voice laced with both sadness and hope. "Don't forget what we fought for here." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I won't. I promise." With that, he turned and began walking toward the edge of the cliff, where his stolen Carrack dropship awaited. Narai watched him go, her heart heavy but at peace. He had given them a chance, and now it was up to them to seize it. As the dropship's engines roared to life and Ethan took off into the sky, Narai turned back to her people, free at last, standing together on the precipice of a new dawn. There was much work to be done, but for the first time in years, she felt hope. The galaxy was vast, full of both darkness and light. But here, on Xylora Prime, a new light had been kindled. And it would burn brightly for all who needed it. He was a soldier, and soldiers like him don't settle. They moved from battle to battle, always chasing a fight they couldn't walk away from.